Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as his car crawled along the narrow dirt road. The headlights cut through the thick fog, but even that light seemed feeble against the suffocating darkness of the woods. The GPS on his phone had long since given up, stuck on recalculating. For the past 20 minutes. He had only his uncle's hand-drawn map to guide him now, a crude sketch with barely legible instructions. When the cabin came into view, Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine. It was smaller than he had imagined, barely more than a wooden shack nestled between gnarled trees. The windows were black voids, the roof sagged under the weight of years, and the whole place exuded a sense of decay. This was the legacy his Uncle Rob had left him, a remote cabin in the middle of nowhere. Jack stepped out of the car, the crunch of dead leaves beneath his boots unnaturally loud in the silence. No wind, no animals, not even the sound of distant traffic. Just the eerie stillness of a place the world had forgotten. As he approached the cabin, the floorboards of the porch groaned under his weight, and he hesitated, feeling as if something unseen was watching him from the tree line. Inside, the air was cold and damp. The furniture was covered in white sheets that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. A layer of dust coated everything, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. Jack set his bag down and wandered the cabin. His flashlight beam illuminated strange carvings on the walls, intricate symbols and patterns that spiraled and twisted. They looked ancient, almost ritualistic. On the kitchen table, he found a journal. The leather cover was cracked, and the pages yellowed with age. It was his uncle's handwriting, scrawled and erratic, as if written in a hurry. The entries started innocuously enough, musings about the isolation and beauty of the woods. But as Jack flipped through the pages, the tone darkened. "There's something in the forest," one entry read. "It watches me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the signs are everywhere. The carvings, the whispers at night. It knows I'm here." Jack shivered and closed the journal. He told himself it was just the ramblings of a lonely old man, but a deep unease settled in his chest. He decided to get some rest and tackle the cleanup in the morning. That night, Jack woke to a sound. At first, he thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was a low, guttural hum, like the sound of a distant chant. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. The sound grew louder, accompanied by a faint tapping noise, like nails drumming on wood. He grabbed his flashlight and crept toward the source of the noise. The beam of light danced across the walls as the sound led him to the living room. The journal was lying open on the table, its pages fluttering as though moved by an unseen hand. The tapping grew louder, coming from the front door. Jack's breath hitched. Someone, or something, was outside. Summoning his courage, he approached the door and flung it open. The porch was empty, but the fog had thickened, curling around the trees like ghostly tendrils. Then he saw them, footprints in the dirt. Bare footprints, impossibly large, leading away from the cabin and into the forest. He hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to stay inside, but something compelled him to follow. The footprints led him deeper into the woods, the flashlight barely piercing the suffocating darkness. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, and Jack's pulse raced. The trail ended abruptly at a clearing. In the center stood a massive tree, its bark twisted and blackened as if burned. Strange symbols were carved into its trunk, identical to the ones in the cabin. Jack stepped closer, and the chanting stopped. The silence was deafening. Then, from the shadows, figures emerged. They were tall and impossibly thin, their limbs elongated and contorted. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and their mouths stretched into unnatural grins. Jack stumbled backward, his flashlight flickering. One of the creatures raised a skeletal hand and pointed at him. The others began to mimic the motion, pointing and tilting their heads in unison. Jack turned and ran, his heart pounding in his ears. The trees seemed to close in around him, the fog thickening until he could barely see. He tripped and fell, the flashlight slipping from his grasp and shattering. In the darkness, the chanting returned, louder and more menacing. Jack scrambled to his feet and ran blindly, the sounds of footsteps, inhumanly fast and heavy, closing in behind him. He burst into the cabin and slammed the door shut, locking it. The chanting stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a whisper came from behind him. "You shouldn't have come." Jack spun around, but there was no one there. The carvings on the walls began to glow faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. The cabin shook, and the temperature plummeted. Shadows crawled along the walls, taking on monstrous shapes. The last thing Jack saw was the journal on the table, its pages flipping wildly. A single line burned itself into the wood. It was never the forest you needed to fear. It was us. The next morning, the cabin stood empty. Jack's car was still parked outside, but there was no sign of him. Locals say the woods are cursed, and on quiet nights, you can hear the faint sound of chanting carried on the wind.